My name is Elaine. I am 34 years old. And the night my grandmother's entire estate was handed to my brother in a conference room, full of people who knew exactly what they had done, I finally understood that some families are not built on love. They are built on strategy. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without context. And the context is what makes it unbearable. My grandmother, Lorraine, was 81 years old when she passed. She had lived alone in the same house in Flagstaff, Arizona for 37s, the same house she and my grandfather had bought the year my mother was born. The same house where I had spent every summer of my childhood sleeping in the back bedroom that smelled like cedar and old paperback novels. She was sharp. That is the first thing anyone who knew her would say. Sharp, private, and fiercely independent. After my grandfather died in 2019, I was the one who stepped in. Not because anyone asked me to, because it was obvious that someone needed to and no one else was going to do it. I lived 2 hours away in Phoenix at the time. I was working as a paralegal at an estate planning firm, which, looking back, is either ironic or exactly why I should have seen all of this coming firm. Every weekend for 4 years, I drove up to Flagstaff. I took Grandma Lorraine to her doctor appointments. I organized her medications. I sat with her through 2 rounds of surgery, one for her hip and one for the cataract in her left eye. When she had a small stroke in early 2022 and lost some mobility on her right side, I was the one who researched rehabilitation facilities, interviewed home care aides, and ultimately moved in with her for 3 months to help her relearn how to button her own shirts. My brother, Philip, 40 years old, lived in Denver. He called on her birthday and at Christmas. Sometimes, my mother's sister, my Aunt Sandra, 58 years old, lived 20 minutes from Grandma Lorraine in Flagstaff and visited approximately 4 times in those 4 years. She always had a reason, a work conflict, a cold, something the kids needed. I did not resent them at the time. Or maybe I did a little. In the small, private way, you allow yourself to feel things you know you're not supposed to say out loud. But I was not there for the credit. I was there because I loved my grandmother, and because she needed me, and because every time I walked through that cedar-smelling front door, she would say, "There's my girl," and I felt like the most important person in the world. Grandma Lorraine updated her will in January of 2023. I did not know this at the time. What I knew was that she had shown me a copy of her previous will 2 years earlier when I had helped her organize her important documents into a fire-safe box. At that time, her estate, the house, her savings account, her investment portfolio, and a collection of antique jewelry she had inherited from her own mother, was divided equally between her 2 surviving children, my mother Carol and my Aunt Sandra. There was also a small separate bequest for me and Philip, $20,000 each, written in specifically because she wanted us to know she had thought of us. I remember reading it and feeling moved. I told her it was generous. She waved her hand the way she always did when she thought someone was making a fuss. "That's what you do for people you love," she said. "You plan ahead." She died in March of 2023 from complications following pneumonia. She had been sick for 2 weeks. I had taken leave from work and spent those 2 weeks at the hospital, sleeping in the family waiting room on a pull-out chair, making decisions with her doctors because my mother was in poor health and couldn't travel, and because no one else came. Philip flew in for the last 36 hours. He stood in the doorway of her room and cried, and I remember thinking that I did not recognize who he was in that moment, not because his grief was false, but because grief felt like the only honest thing he had shown up to offer. Aunt Sandra arrived the morning after Grandma Lorraine passed. She was very organized. She already had the name of a probate attorney. That should have been my first signal. The reading of the will was scheduled 3 weeks later. My mother attended via video call because of her health. I drove back up to Flagstaff and sat in a beige conference room with Sandra, Philip, Sandra's husband Norman, and an attorney named Gerald Fitch, who had an office that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. Gerald opened the file and read, Grandma Lorraine's estate, as of January of 2023, had been revised. The house, the savings, the investment portfolio, everything was left entirely to Philip. A separate handwritten addendum attached and notarized Fort Vandra stated that her jewelry collection went to sin addressing. My mother received $10,000. I received nothing, not a dollar, not a mention. I did not make a sound. I remember staring at the edge of Gerald's desk and thinking very specifically about the cedar smell of the front bedroom. About the summer I was 9 years old, and Grandma Lorraine taught me to make pie crust by pressing the dough with the heel of my hand, not the palm, because the palm is too warm. About the pull-out chair in the hospital waiting room, and the sound the fluorescent lights made at 3 in the morning when everyone else had gone home. Gerald finished reading. He folded his hands on the desk. Sandra did not look at me. Philip looked at the window. I said, "When did she revise this?" Gerald told me the revision was dated January 14th, 2023. 14 months after her stroke. 13 months after she had lost significant mobility and begun showing the early signs of what her doctors had gently referred to as mild cognitive decline. I drove home to Phoenix in complete silence. I did not call anyone. I ate a sandwich I had bought at a gas station at 9:30 at night and sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The next morning, I went to work and asked my supervising attorney, a woman named Patricia Walsh, if I could speak with her privately about a personal legal matter. I told her what had happened. I used the clinical language I had spent years learning: undue influence, testamentary capacity, cognitive impairment at time of execution. I said the words the way you say words when you are trying to keep your voice level. Patricia listened to everything. Then she said, "Do you have medical records from that period?" I had medical records. I had been at every appointment. I had been the one who signed, do you sign it, the coordination of care forms. I had 4 years of documentation I had kept out of habit, because working in estate law for long enough teaches you that the paper trail is the only thing that matters when people start arguing over what someone meant to do. I started making calls the following week. I contacted Grandma Lorraine's primary care physician and requested copies of all records from 2022 onward. Her neurologist, the one who had assessed her after the stroke, had noted at multiple appointments that she was showing signs of moderate cognitive decline by mid-2022, and that major financial decisions should be made with support. That language was in the notes, written down, dated. I contacted the notary who had certified the January 2023 will revision. Notaries are required to assess basic comprehension at the time of signing. I asked whether any cognitive assessment had been documented. The notary, a man named Brian Kowalski, told me he had no specific notes about that appointment beyond the standard acknowledgement. Gerald Fitch's office, and I contacted Gerald Fitch's and asked who had initiated to revise the will. His paralegal, after some hesitation, told me that the appointment had been requested by a third party acting on behalf of the testator. I asked who. She told me it was Sandra. I put the phone down and sat very still for a long time. Here is what I eventually pieced together through records requests, conversations with Grandma Lorraine's home care aides, and one very long phone call with a neighbor of hers named Helen, who had known my grandmother for 22 years and wanted to talk. In the fall of 2022, while I was managing Grandma Lorraine's recovery, Sandra had begun visiting more frequently. Not to help, the aides confirmed she never participated in any caregiving tasks. But she had started taking Grandma Lorraine to lunch, just the two of them, and on several occasions had brought Norman along. Helen told me that during this period, Grandma Lorraine had mentioned to her that Sandra had been helping her get her affairs in order, and that she wanted to make sure Philip was taken care of. Philip had been going through a divorce at the time. His business, a contracting company he had started in Denver, was struggling. He had borrowed money from Grandma Lorraine twice in 2021, a total of $45,000, and there had been no repayment, Sandra had no children. Sandra and Norman had, according to their own tax records, which became relevant later, significant personal savings. Sandra did not need the inheritance. What Sandra had was a problem. Specifically, she had a brother-in-law who was in financial trouble, a mother who was aging and increasingly susceptible to suggestion, and a niece, me, who had spent 4 years building a relationship with that mother that Sandra apparently found threatening. I do not know exactly what was said in those lunches. I do not know whether Sandra told Grandma Lorraine that I had been complaining, or taking advantage, or planning to take the house, or any of the other things people say when they are trying to quietly turn a vulnerable person against someone who loves them. What I know is the outcome. My attorney, Patricia, filed a formal contest of the will in Coconino Sound Superior Court in May of 2023. The grounds were undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. We had the neurologist's notes. We had the testimony of 2 home care aides who confirmed that Grandma Lorraine had become easily confused and agreeable to suggestions she might not have accepted before in the months prior to the revision. We had Helen's statement. We had the phone records showing the frequencies of Sandra's contact in the months leading up to January 2023 compared to the 2 years prior. We also, and I want to be precise here, had my grandmother's own voice. In October of 2022, I had given Grandma Lorraine a small digital voice recorder. The kind you can find at any electronics store for about $30, because she had been frustrated that she couldn't always remember conversations with her doctors. I had shown her how to use it. She had used it sporadically, leaving recordings of her own notes and reminders. Some of those recordings, pulled from the device after her death when I was helping sort her belongings, included fragments of conversations she had recorded without, I believe, fully remembering she was recording. In one of those fragments, Sandra's voice was audible. The conversation was fragmented and sometimes unclear, but Grandma Lorraine's voice, in a moment when she sounded uncertain and tired, said, "But Sandra, Elaine's been here every week," and Sandra's voice said, "I know, Mom. But Elaine has her own life. She doesn't really want to be here. She's doing it because she feels obligated. Philip is the one who really needs you right now." My grandmother said after a pause, "I just don't want to hurt anyone." And Sandra said, "You won't. This is the right thing. You'll see." I listened to that recording alone in my apartment on a Tuesday night in June, and I want to tell you that I cried, but that's not exactly bad. What happened was that I sat completely still for a long time, the way you do when something confirms what you already knew, but hoped was not true, and I felt an exhaustion so specific and so deep that it was almost like peace. I did not want the house. I want to say that clearly, because I think people assume the goal of a will contest is always money. It was not, for me. I had a job, I had savings, I was fine. What I wanted was for the record to show what had happened. What had been done to my grandmother in the last months of her life, when she was frightened and confused and trying to hold on to the people she loved, and someone had used that fear to rewrite her choices. The case settled in October of 2023. I will not go into every detail of the settlement because some of it is confidential, but what I can tell you is this. The revised will was invalidated. The court returned to the prior version, which left the estate split between my mother and Sandra as it had originally been written. The house, the savings, the portfolio, split equally between 2 sisters, as Grandma Lorraine had intended before someone convinced her otherwise. Philip received nothing from the estate beyond the original $20,000 bequest that had always been there. Sandra did not attend the final hearing. Her attorney submitted days after the settlement's finalized. Philip called me 2 days the settlement was finalized. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was about 4 minutes long and that I have listened to exactly once. He said he had not known what Sandra had done. He said he was sorry. He said he had never asked for any of it. He said he hoped I could understand that he had been in a hard place and he hadn't asked questions he probably should have asked. I believe parts of that are true. I've I have not called him back. My mother, Carol, received her share of the estate in November. She called me when the wire transfer came through, and she cried. And I cried too. Not about the money, but about the fact that we were talking about her mother, and that we both missed her, and that the whole previous year had been something neither of us had ever expected to go through. I still drive up to Flagstaff sometimes. Not to the house. It was sold as part of the estate settlement, and someone else lives there now. But I drive through the neighborhood sometimes, on the way to other things, and I think about the cedar smell and the pie crust and the way she said, "There's my girl," like it was the simplest fact in the world. I do not speak to Sandra. I do not plan to. There is a version of this story where I tell you I found peace by forgiving everyone involved and focusing on the love I shared with my grandmother and letting go of the rest. People like that version. It is a very clean ending. The truth is messier. I am still angry sometimes, on Tuesdays nights when I'm not expecting it. I am angry that my grandmother's last year included confusion and manipulation that I couldn't fully protect her from. No matter how Casamite and I drove up, no matter how many weekends I drove up, no matter how carefully I kept the files. I am angry that someone looked at a frightened 80-year-old woman and saw an opportunity. But I am also the person who made sure the record shows what actually happened. I am the person who had the files, and the receipts, and 4 years of showing up every single weekend, and a voice recorder my grandmother used to remember her doctor's appointments. I am the person who knew how to read a will, and who understood what undue influence meant before most people learned the term exists, and who had a supervising attorney who listened when I asked for 15 minutes of her time. Some things you cannot prevent, but you can make sure they do not go undocumented. Grandma Lorraine used to say that the hardest part of getting old was not losing your strength. It was learning who had been paying attention all along. She was paying attention too, even at the end, even when she was tired and uncertain and susceptible to the wrong voices. Somewhere under all of that, she knew what was true. And I have to believe, that she knew I had been there. There's my girl, I am still here.